Again, we'd like to introduce the Family Builders Conference panel here. Today we're going to have a discussion on step families. Dwayne's going to be leading that discussion for us. We have some excellent materials in the back. If you know of somebody who's in a step family situation, or if you yourself are in one, we strongly recommend that you get some of those materials and continue to grow and learn about how to have an effective step family. And so we'll let Dwayne take over the discussion now and share with us where we're going to go. So thank you so much.
All right. So let's just talk about step families for a minute to open the session. We have a lot of blended families. The way that our culture is moving today, it's definitely not the ideal way that Scripture plays out the families. We've had a whole lot of talk about that. One of the hearts of Family Builders Conference, obviously, is to try to increase the longevity of families, because in our culture, in a lot of ways, we have families that are breaking apart, whether they're separating, whether they're in divorce, and then what happens, obviously, after that is that they don't want to stay alone, so then they bring two families together. I know that there are some in the room that experience that firsthand. I'm sure everyone in the room knows of people who are in a step family situation or in a blended family today, which is the common way that it's phrased. There's still a lot of single parents that are raising children with just one parent because of a divorce or because of a separation or something that's left there. So, we want to recognize it and talk about the issues that face step families, because wherever we land and wherever we find ourselves after whatever's been created, we still have to deal with that in a way that brings the best possible reality that we can have. So I don't really see that we have a lot of blended families right here in the congregation today, but I know that you know people who have blended family situations, and so it's good to be equipped to give good advice about that and to offer some help and support. As far as ministries go, for sure, I know that each one here that's involved with ministry, being able to support a blended family and offer advice that keeps them going in a better manner than they would have been going is essential to what we're doing. So we have some questions about that we think are relevant to step families, and then also it would be good in the discussion part to talk about that, maybe some of the issues that you might be facing or challenges with those in your family, or if you're in that immediate situation, it would be good to hear feedback from you as well. So the first question we're going to have is for Keith, and we want to know, how can a person go about earning respect of stepchildren in a blended family situation, especially if you're coming in as a new parent and there's already children in the home and you're dealing as parents together. How is it that we can do some things that'll help us earn respect of the children that may not be our own biological children, but be children that we're involved with raising?
Yeah, I think this is a good question, because sometimes you find that in a step situation, a step parent will come in and they'll immediately demand respect from the children in the home because they're, married to somebody, or because they're an adult, etc. But there's a lot of challenges that young people face inside of step families. One of those is the insiders versus the outsiders. And all of this material and a lot of what we're talking about is given to us by Ron Deal, who is an expert in the Smart Step family, and just real fantastic material. But the insider versus outsider, an insider is somebody who has a blood relative in the relationship. So if two families are coming together, if a mom's coming with a child or two, children, and they're blood relatives, they're insiders. So the step-parent is an outsider in that situation, and it can be on both sides, where both parents come together with children from previous marriages. And so a lot of times, the outsiders try to become insiders immediately. They want to immediately go from that position. And a lot of times, when you talk to young people, they feel like step-parents can try too hard and want to get into that relationship too quickly, and they wish they wouldn't. They wish that step-parents would back off just a little bit and give them some time to adjust. A lot of times it's interesting, because stepchildren are dealing with loss. Maybe a parent has left the family, or maybe there's a divorce situation, or maybe a lot of times step families occur from death. Somebody's died, and so now, mom or dad has remarried, and they're madly in love, with their new spouse, but the children are still dealing with loss, and even now dealing with loss all over again, because maybe they lost their first parent and they can perceive that now that mom is being remarried or dad's remarried, they're losing again. So the loss factor is something that a lot of times step parents can miss and not understand fully. And so taking your time with that and giving them time to adjust to all of those things is really important. Honoring the history is another thing. Ron talked about, if your family has certain traditions that they're already doing, maybe you're a dad and you've got a couple of kids and you guys like going to baseball games every once in a while. Is there a cricket in here? Oh, wow. That's okay. All right. It's okay. So they need to honor the history. Maybe dad has a tradition of going to a baseball game with his kids, or mom, she likes to go to church with her kids, and then they like to do Chinese food. And a lot of times, what people end up doing is they want to put everybody together real quick and try to force everybody to carry on those same traditions. But that's not necessarily always the best, especially if it doesn't work. And one of the things that we get from Ron Deal is that if it doesn't work, stop doing it. Because what you're trying to force oftentimes will never work, but if you just let it go for a little bit, then it will slowly come together, and those lines can be blended. And then another thing that was interesting, and you talk to children or parents in this situation, is a lot of times kids still hold on to the fantasy of mom and dad reuniting. And so they can really reject the idea of a step-parent simply for the fact that they're holding out that mom and dad will be remarried and be together again at some point. And, that can take some time to get over. And some kids, it takes many years for them to realize that mom and dad are both remarried again and they've got other children now, and the idea of them coming back together is not really realistic, but they don't know that. And so they're resisting you, not because they don't like you or not because they think you're a bad person, but simply because that you're not the ideal, you're not the fantasy that they're wanting. And so we have to be mindful of that when we think about gaining the respect, because the respect is gained over time. It's not something that can happen right away. And my stepdad, his name was Terry, and I remember as a kid, my mom married him whenever I was, I think, 6 years old, and he was just a friend. That's all he ever tried to be to me. I mean, we introduced things like wood carving and just watching movies together. He never really tried to usurp my dad's authority in my life, because I had a lot of loyalty issues in that sense, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But he just was my friend, and because he took his time and just did that way, I accepted him as my stepfather. And then my dad remarried as well, and my stepmom, Dee Dee, she was really easy to get along with. She never tried to force, her way on us or on me specifically, and she was just a real kind person. It was really easy to accept her, but she was never my mom. I knew that, but she didn't try to force anything. Again, she was my friend. Dee Dee and I used to go on car rides together, and we'd go get, a soda or ice cream or something like that. She'd let me drive her car. I loved that about her, that at the age of 8 or 9 years old, I got to drive her car around, and that was awesome. So, winning. So they're all just, really, you just got to take your time and be a friend. I think that's how you get the respect.
Anybody else have anything to offer on that? I can just speak to one of the issues that he brought up, is that you want the children are holding out for the parents to reunite. I think that is a really strong pull inside to have both parents there as children, and that's really traumatic. Even for me, I know when I was a child, I can remember going to public school in Columbia, Missouri, and I would see some of my friends, their parents would say they're getting a divorce. My parents are getting a divorce, and in my own mind, and maybe even sometimes aloud, I would say, I don't really have to worry about that because I know my parents are never going to get divorced. For that was a real security statement or a real security feeling, and I thought about that later as, my mom and dad did eventually get a divorce, and so that was traumatic. Even just remembering the stability I felt as I told that to my friends when I was younger, and then at an older age, going through that experience was difficult. So when I think of children who are in process and who haven't come to a maturity where they can really process all of those events the same way, they just want to hold on to both spouses together. So I think that's a really strong thing, which is the reason that we talk about these things, is to highlight that there are a lot of, so there's the one relationship of the two parents that are coming together, and that's usually the focus of the two people that are there, but there's all these extended relationships, and as you go on down the tree, the relationships get bigger and they affect more people and more people. And so we want to really engage in that process and understand that it is an easy thing for people to process.
And this can play out many different ways within the same family, depending upon the age of the kids. My father died when I was 20 years old, but I had a younger brother, a much younger brother, and whenever my mother remarried, to my younger brother, who was 6 when his father died, coming to accept a step-parent several years later wasn't that big of a deal. He had some issues, but to the older kids, that a whole new side of the family coming in, and nobody could be as good as our dad, and so there was a lot of pushback from that side, seeing from adult kids seeing our mother remarry and bringing in this whole step family side of things, that there were issues that were dealt with differently for the different ages of kids. It was just something we had to work through, and time is the thing that you can't push these things. You really have to work to gain that respect, and over time, we really came to love and respect my stepdad as much as my real dad. He was a great man that we really appreciated, and fulfilled a great time in my mom's life.
One of the things we don't talk about much with step families, but I was just thinking in my own family that my parents have been married for 60-some years, but my mom's parents divorced before I was born, and then my grandmother, my mom's mom, was married 2 other times after that. And I remember as a child, between 4 years old up into my early teens, trying to figure out all these different relationships. So I knew who my mom's dad was and had a fairly good relationship with him. But then I also thought, as when my grandmother remarried, then again as before I was born, so I also thought of my step grandfather as my grandparent. That's what I knew him as. But then he died when I was probably 7 years old, and my grandmother was married 2 times after that. And it all got very confusing for me about how that relationship played out, And we don't often think about grandchildren in the whole respect, but that all comes into play too.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was thinking for a second about just how many people really are blended. We don't even realize it. It's so common nowadays that we don't even realize it. We sometimes pass us. I've realized that all of us here on the panel come from or have effects of blended family. 4 of us have divorced parents, or parents have been divorced, or remarried, or they remarried to somebody else. Of course, James just said that his father passed away, but his mom remarried. And then one of us on the panel have a daughter that's divorced, and some of us have grandparents that have been divorced. So you see, sort of, when you think about it, you just take the panel and you realize the blendedness, that it's not just those of us here, but it's our grandparents, and then onto our children. We live in a society that is very difficult not to have blendedness within the heritage somewhere along the line. And I think the biggest thing is to recognize that it's going to be different. There's going to be challenges. I think when somebody decides to marry somebody else that is not the original biological parent of their children, I don't think they need to go into La La Land and think it's going to be perfect. But I think if they're aware and they go into it recognizing that there's going to be challenges, they're going to come. You don't even have to work very hard at it. If you go into it sort of blindly thinking that you can be in and you can be, the children are going to accept you just because of who you are. If you think that you're not going to have challenges, it's absolutely wrong. And I think a lot of it is families that blend together do not oftentimes become proactive in preparing for the challenges. They become reactive in the challenges. And because they're not proactive, because they're not ready, they're reactive, and then they get emotional. And sometimes there's issues that go on for many years and can affect the children for many years if you're not careful. So I would definitely say proactiveness is a lot better than reactiveness when it comes to that.
So let's just talk about one of those practical challenges that a lot of blended families are facing. So as Scott was speaking this morning, he said sometimes as we go through the process of separation and divorce, a court or a judge is saying, okay, so this child's gonna stay with this home for the primary residence, and then every other weekend, this home's gonna get visiting rights. And so then what you have is you have the family that have come together, the two spouses, and they have their own blended family, and then they have their ex-spouse on each side, and then their ex-spouse, or however, I don't want to say that in a derogatory manner, so forgive the expression, but the ex-spouse then is connected to someone else. So then you have really three kind of viable relationships that are going on, and then the children are going back and forth on these homes in whatever way that it works out. And so there's always the challenge of this home not causing a lot of chaos and trying to navigate the relationship of keeping the peace and living, in peace with relative peace to get the cooperation so that the children aren't feeling all the weight of that load. And a lot of times it's impossible that the children aren't going to feel that. But what kind of advice could we give parents that find themselves in a blended situation to just moderate that relationship on the other side so that their home doesn't become chaos?
Don't do it. No, I don't.
Well, I like the answer that you're giving in context
Sure.
of this, that there's going to be challenges. That's one of the challenges, is to make sure you maintain a peaceful living relationship so that you can get that cooperation. So what kind of advice?
Yeah, I think, when you think about the confusion, when you think what you just described is confusing, because you just simplified it to say, well, you have a wife who now has a husband who goes off to marry, or ex-husband who goes off to marry somebody else. What if you have a wife that's been married 3 times and she's had a child with every husband that she was married to, and then those 3 parents, they go off and marry somebody else, and now they have children. I mean, it can get so convoluted that it becomes very challenging for any family to have a grasp, because now not only do you have one parent demanding time with that child or dealing with that child, but now you have 3 parents that are dealing with that child, and that child has siblings connected to all of them, especially if that father was connected to them, even though they may not be their biological father. I mean, you can just see the confusion. And so the one thing that I guess that, one of the things we want to really try to implore through Family Builders Conference is for people to really think about those kinds of things and the consequences of what's going to happen to the child, the confusion and just the drama that they're going to be dealing with, the chaos in their life. Because I know for a fact that I've counseled children, young people, who have, the mother has children from 2 different fathers, and the one son or daughter, the one father he's a very good father to this child, but the other child is left without sort of having that connection to a good father. And so that's something that they carry the rest of their life, is I don't have that connection with a father figure, because that father only applied himself to his son or daughter and disregarded the other son or daughter. And you can see as a mother how challenging that is, that you have to sort of work through that and try to work that out and try to implore. Maybe the answer would be is that when you have a healthy community, when you have a healthy assembly, and you have a healthy body of encouraging people, maybe the men in the assembly can then take on that role to some degree and assist. That's what I would say is probably one of the answers. But you have to have health. You have to have health in the assembly. In other words, everybody has to agree that that child is the primary focus, and that everything that's done is to assist that child, boy or daughter, through it. And then you've got the opposite as well. If parents, some parents now are fathers, and they're raising their children without having a wife or a mother in the house, and that's sort of the other side of it. Everybody has to work together. But I think what happens sometimes is we don't project out to see the consequence. I think we react to emotion. I think we don't work through our problems. We oftentimes don't know how to navigate or negotiate through the issues, the chaos that we're having. And I think it runs into chaos down the line. So I don't know that we have a definite answer. I guess we can have several answers, but it depends on the situation. But I would say definitely thinking about what's going to happen, what's coming down the line, and maybe being more proactive to say, let's think about the children first and think about ourselves later.
One of the things that Ron quoted was an ancient African proverb which says, when two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And, one of the things that I know about my mom and dad is that they weren't the best at getting along. And, I felt that, when I would go to Dad's house every other weekend, and there was a lot of animosity and anger on both sides. Mom never wanted to let me go, so she made that really difficult for Dad. And then Dad didn't necessarily care for Mom very much, and so it was sort of this tug of war constantly that I felt when I was a kid, and it definitely made things more complicated. And so I guess my encouragement to I know I haven't personally experienced a divorce, but I would say that if you can humble yourself and just try to maintain some sort of neutral component there with the ex-spouse, it would be really helpful to the kids. That's the honest truth, is that, it's not about you or your pride. And, my dad was irritated that he had to pay child support, for umpteen years. And there's just a lot of things that go into all that stuff. And it's frustrating for parents, I can imagine. But it's more frustrating for children. And it hurts them more than your pride. And I think if there's any encouragement I could give, it's to try to maintain peace with the ex-spouse, because it will really benefit the life of the child. And there are examples, obviously, when that's not the case. Maybe an ex-spouse is a drug addict or a violent person, and other things that are bad. Yeah, child's in danger. That's the exception, obviously, to what I'm saying. But it was never stated. My dad never told me, "Oh, well, your mom's doing the best she can," on this limited income, and my mom never said, "Well, your dad's trying as hard as he can to raise you every other weekend. He's a good man." Those things never came out of their mouths, and it was always, yeah, it was pretty rough.
And I think you're hitting on something that I would think would be the real key advice to the person who's now in that situation and they want to bring peace to that situation is that you can't control the drama outside of your scope of, so you can't control what the other ex-spouse or on the outside can say, but you certainly can control the talk that you say. And I really like the opposite of what you said is that maybe there does need to be some humility in a way that says, okay, so we went through this thing, but your dad he's doing what he can do. And not being dishonest, but at the same time being as supportive as possible to create the most calm and security for the children. I think that's a real key component. And I think anybody can do that to a degree because you have a responsibility and an obligation to protect your child, and I think that's a key part of why you would want to do that. The why is that it helps your own children to be better and less emotional and less chaotic with that.
Yeah, and on that line, I would say to be mindful, and I know as the discussion goes, we're going to be talking more about it, but I would say to be careful that you don't make the child feel guilty because of the way that they want to associate with their father or mother. And as a stepfather, you'd be more like, or a stepmother, you'd be like, well, I'm giving you everything. Why are you wanting? So trying to keep them, focus on them, but also trying to encourage them so you don't make them feel guilty about the way that they feel about their parent, because it's going to be, they're going to be interested in them. They might have the worst parent in the world, but there's no need for you as an adult to make them feel guilty that they want to know who they are, or that they're interested in them. They sort of have to discover at some point why you kept them away, why, what the deal was. But I think feelings of guilt are not good for a child to have.
And I think it just goes back to assuming responsibility for the marriage as it unfolded. I mean, there's a certain amount of responsibility on both sides, but the trouble is that when we have the real, emotional wrong feelings, and the blame that goes a bit too far. So accepting responsibility is a way, I think, of just taking that emotion out of it and saying, okay, this is where we are, so let's do the best we can, and let's absolutely support the children, because they need to be connected to both parents. That's the way Yahweh designed us as people. We need to be connected to both of our parents, and we have something inside of us that makes us want to do that. So keep that under control. All right. So Scott, our next question, or our next thought is some advice on how to manage alone time. Like, so there's a new blended family coming together, and so your biological children want to have just their biological parents' time, especially if they're coming from, say, 2 weeks over here and they're just getting 1 weekend. Maybe that child's frame of reference is, I just want to spend time with my dad, or I want to spend time with my mom. I don't really want to go out to eat with all three of us. I just want to have my alone time. So is there any advice that we could have for people when they want to have that alone time to take the emotion or the jealousy or whatever feelings come out of that?
Yeah, I think the first thing to remember is, in a blended family, the dynamics in the marriage, first of all, are different than in an original marriage, I'll call it, between a couple. So my view is that in a family, the primary relationship in any family, in a married couple, is between the married couple, and the children take a secondary role in that relationship in the family. With a blended family or step family, that becomes a lot different, because each child coming into that situation has a long-term relationship with their parent or parents already. And so I think it's very important that the step-parent recognizes that. And so I suppose my main advice is that when you have these situations where you only have periodic rights to see a child, in some cases, there's a situation I know of right now in my own family, extended family, where the father has moved out of state, and the mother is making it very difficult for him to see his children. He wants to see them very much. He's made some mistakes, but when he came to see them recently and was allowed to see them, it was under some kind of close supervision. And it wasn't court appointed, it was just that the mother made it very difficult for that to happen. So, when we're in situations like that, where there's not really joint custody or it's sporadic, I do think it's important that the parent gets to spend some alone time with the child. Having said that, I also feel it's very important that sometime during the course of their stay there, let's say it's over the course of a couple weeks, that they understand that their parent has now married somebody else, and that person is very important to them. And so there has to be an effort, at least, to blend that family, even though it's going to be a very sporadic thing, at least to the extent where the parent is making sure that their child shows some kind of respect and is learning to love their spouse that they're married to now. But I do think they need space, and especially at the beginning. I mean, like we've talked about here on this whole subject, these aren't things that you can force, because that child has feelings, and that child may, depending on the situation, may already have a difficult relationship with the parent that lives far away, or that they're not seeing very much. And so that has to be worked on through the process. So I do think it's important that alone time exists, but you have to try fitting the family together still.
Anyone else have anything to offer on that? And feel free, if you have a comment with one of the questions or you want to offer something with that, we'll get one of the mics down to you. But it is important, I think, our focus on this panel is to try to offer some advice, really dealing with children and how to make that less traumatic on their behalf. And especially if you have people around you, I know that we've all probably met someone who's complained about these exact issues because they're not getting enough time, or as Scott said, they're making it very difficult just to see your children. And that's a difficult spot to be in, but as adults who are maturing, we need to definitely step up to the plate and make sure that we're doing every effort on our part, to make that process as good as it can be for our children. So James, there's also dealing with loyalty issues between spouse and the children, and I see this work out just what we're talking about in some of the discussion that we've had, is that a new spouse comes in who would be a step parent, and so then there's this vie for time and attention, and sometimes there's jealousy between the relationship of the family of origin, the children of the origin, and there's also some crossover between treating unfairly the children from your non-biological children, or even ignoring your family when the children are away. But we want to talk about the loyalty issues and how we can deal with loyalty issues between spouse and children on some of those relationships.
Yeah, so blended families can occur in several different ways. You can obviously have a divorce and remarriage. You can have a death, as in the case of my father, and remarriage. You can have an unwed mother with a pregnancy ended up marrying later, and all of those situations kind of create different dynamics in the family, and how a child may have loyalty to a biological parent that's not present in their home, as opposed to the new stepdad or whatever. You may have issues where, and I hear this a lot, of a parent claiming more loyalty to their children than to the new spouse that they just married. My kids come first in everything. My kids come first, and they're constantly pushing aside that new spouse that they just dedicated their life to in a new marriage. And so this plays out in many different ways, and you really have to, as we said, you have to give it time, especially whenever you're talking about the kids. But one of the things that we need to realize is within the culture of a blended family, especially one that resulted from a previous divorce, you end up with a situation where the second marriage isn't viewed with the same permanency as a first marriage. Because you've already dealt with the reality of a divorce, now the second marriage is viewed as much less of a sanctified thing. It's not nearly as permanent in your own mind or in the parents' minds, and that's something that we have to get past. We have to get over that. Just because our previous marriage failed for some reason, you need to go into the second marriage with the idea that this is solid, this is solidified. You are committing the rest of your life, even though the first one didn't work out. You are committing the rest of your life to this other spouse. You can't commit your life to your children because eventually, as we all know, they grow, they leave the home, they create their own families, and you are left with this other spouse. You have to live with that person, hopefully for the rest of your life. That's what you're saying in that marriage. And that's one of the issues that, when people claim loyalty to a child over a spouse, you need to back up and look at why you got married to begin with. Did you go into this for the right reasons? Are you really committed to this spouse? And maybe get some counseling on that, on solidifying your relationship, because your kids are going to leave your home. That's the reason you're raising them up, training them up to take on the world as individuals on their own. And you need to have a solid relationship with your spouse. Whenever you're dealing with kids that have a relationship or a loyalty issue between a parent that's not present, you need to be careful with that and not try to usurp that position. That that father figure that's not present, or mother figure, either way, that has a real connection to that child, that person has a real connection, even though they're not present, they have a real connection to that child, and you don't want to usurp their authority or their position, but allow the time and the process to play out that where you build the respect of the new parent, and not try to rush things, not try to replace them, but at the same time, the biological parent really needs to take action. That the biological parent that's present needs to take action to support the step parent and support their role, and not try to diminish their role in the household, but to support them and to help them along, and to help the children accept that person, and not claim loyalty to the child again over the new parent, because that's just reinforcing a problem, a division within the household. So it's really about time and supporting the spouses, each spouse supporting each other, and creating a situation, a culture where that marriage is solid within the new family. In some ways, kids are they're like animals. They sense weakness, and if they sense a division there in your family, they will play that one side against the other, and so you have to have a solid marriage going in, and not allow your kids to divide that. And whenever they sense that is solid, whenever they know they can't play one parent against the other, then it just benefits the entire household.
Yeah, and as we talk about step families, for sure, I think the one thing that we can all agree to is that there are a lot of delicate and varied situations that you'll find yourself in when you're dealing with these issues, and there's just a lot of them that come, and as a relationship and the relationships play out. But we would all say that loyalty is a great trait for anyone to have, right? I mean, it could be one of the words that's on our wall back here, because loyalty is being committed and being faithful to those people that are in your life that you care about the most is a great trait. And unfortunately, when you see this coming up, it's coming up in a negative way, because they're trying to stay loyal to the people, to their peoples, and so when that it can cause jealousy, it can cause emotional feelings, it can cause some complications. At the same time, that loyal trait is a good trait to have, and so trying to find out a way to use that for an advantage. And just as a side note, Lisa and I were at a conference recently, and one of the things that they said is that every time in your relationship you find something that you think is a weakness, the other side of that is a strength. And so if you find that you're diligent about your position, there is a part of that that says, okay, so you are a diligent person. And so trying to make something, so we would say loyalty is a strength, so figuring out a way to make that loyalty become a strength instead of a negative, adverse thing in our family is a good quality to have. I think Elise has a question. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I think it's important to realize too that as even if you are a divorced parent and say your ex-spouse gets remarried, it's important for you to tell your children that it's okay to be friends and to respect that new step-parent, because they are going to feel that loyalty issue, like, man, if I like this new stepdad, then my dad's going to be mad because I already have a dad, and that's my dad, and I can't have this guy over here. But the dad should be able to say confidently, we have a good relationship and we're good, but it's good for you to love that person. You can love more than one person, and you can respect more than one person, because for our children, it only benefits them if we have more adults in their life that love them and can mentor them and can teach them ways. And if they're going to be spending, half of their time with this other parent, then it would only benefit you to make sure that that is a good relationship and a healthy relationship.
Yeah, at least that's a very good point. Anytime that you're talking about what is good for your kids, and that as parents, that should be, that's a primary thing that we're looking for is what is good for our kids. Even if you're no longer in the home, what is good for your kids? And having them in a situation where there is constant strife and bickering and all of this that is very common in a divorce relationship, whenever they're trying to stabilize a new home and foster a good environment for their children, it's only beneficial to the parent that's not present to help solidify that, to help them accept a new person in their life, because that's going to generate a stable home for your kids to live in. You don't want your kids to be growing up in a home that isn't that doesn't have a solid foundation, that isn't stable. And so getting past those emotional issues that we were talking about earlier, and helping to do whatever you can to solidify the home that the kids are in, I think is only beneficial for everybody. It's just getting past our own insecurities, getting past our own fears, and yeah, that's what we've got to work with.
I married my high school sweetheart, and we had 6 children together. And at the point where Elise was really still almost a baby, my wife contracted paranoid schizophrenia and ended up divorcing me. I got sole custody of my 6 children, so there was never a problem in sharing. When the kids wanted to go see their mom, I facilitated that, and that worked out fine. One of those visits was so that Mom could sign an application for a driver's license that I didn't approve of. But when my wife, my first wife, was dying, my second wife and I went to visit her in the hospital with some of the children around, and I was able to tell her that I loved her, and she told me that she loved me. And those were the last words she said to anyone. I think as believers, it's incumbent upon us, when there is a divorce, to continue to love that spouse that we're divorced from. Not in the same way, but we need to really love them. And probably the respect aspect of love would become a little more emphasized in that than some of the other aspects of love. But we need to love and respect them, and we need to be humble. Someone already mentioned that, but humility, love, and respect needs to be part of our relationships with our former spouse and with our present spouse and children and stepchildren. That can go a long ways toward making things good for the children and good for the people, the adults involved.
It's really true. Humility and love and respect. I think Deborah had a
great discussion. I really appreciate the wisdom that you guys are sharing. And there are so many aspects. I really like what you're saying too about, promoting, like Elise said, the more adults in your child's life that love them and look out for them and mentor them, and, the community mindset, like Brother Scott was talking about. I think Ferris said it pretty good. It takes a community to raise a child. And I like the, you want to encourage, even if there's somebody, like an ex-spouse that you don't, obviously they're your ex, you don't feel the same way about them at this time. to promote a good, positive. Like my dad was just, my hero. um, well, so I recognize it's really important to have a good father and a good mother. Anyways, I'm trying to make a long story short here. The issue that I need help with is how do you, and maybe it's just a matter of prayer, but my youngest daughter, doesn't really want to see her dad. And I keep trying to encourage, but I didn't think it's gonna be this emotional of a question. I'm
Yeah, I
sorry.
know it's tough. These are real issues that affect our, all of our lives and stuff. So I appreciate your your candor and your openness to talk about it, because it's an issue that a lot of people are facing in the same way.
Yeah, because everybody deserves the right to. They have the right to love their parents, and
That's right.
and they really need that love back. And so I just what are some things I can do to encourage her? Because there are some valid reasons, and then there's also the fact that she's a teenager.
Sure.
There's a mixture of reasons why she doesn't want to really spend.
That's right.
So I try to really encourage her when he does see her. This is good. This doesn't mean I think he's a great guy or anything, but I want to promote their relationship to the best I can.
Right.
So
And
I'll
and I,
stop there.
Yeah, well, I think one of the easy answers or the quick answers would be that it is, as some of the comments have already mentioned, that it's a process and they have to work through those things, and you can't force someone to like someone. You can't force someone to have feelings that they don't have, and you really can't. You can force them, I guess, to be in a situation physically in a location, but you can't force them to be open to the relationship. So one of the things that you said that I really like, that I think that a lot of people need to hear, is that we do need to stand back behind there and encourage them in right ways, and encourage them in right character, and encourage them in right attitudes. But it takes time, and it's really traumatic on children, and it can affect them for a long period of time. So we have to be in it for the long haul. And so I think that just time will help. Maybe maturity will also help. But it sounds like you're doing the right thing, and that's advice I would give anyone. Just keep encouraging them to step out and stay connected. And they're listening. They may not express that to us, but I love that sometimes you look at, research where it says that even when you're in the biggest battles with your children, they still need to hear from you, and they need to hear good wisdom, biblical advice to help them along it. So I would just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing and keep that attitude. I really like the way you put it. Just because I'm encouraging her to have that relationship that she needs to be connected to doesn't mean that I have to like the person, because obviously there are a whole lot of things that went into it, and that's a very honest and open statement, which I think a lot of people need to deal with in that way, because they need to be connected to their people. Anybody want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think you don't have to like the person, like Brother Dwayne said, but I think it's so important to continue to encourage the child. Just a little bit about how my brother and I were raised, just to kind of maybe help out for those of you that are blended and maybe struggling with this, and how it impacts the child. There's 14 of us. Same father, 3 different women. When I was a child, we were raised with our what you would consider step siblings, but we were not raised like that. In other words, there were 7 boys, 7 girls, and those children that belonged to another woman that lived in the same town as we did in Mexico to me, they were my brothers and my sisters. We were not step. We didn't know that word. We didn't understand that. But we knew that there were two different mothers. We knew that. And as a child, I remember I was probably maybe 6, 7, 8, and I would go to my brother's mother's house, and she would welcome me and cook for me and hug me and talk to me in a loving way. I always felt good there. However, with my mother, it was different. I knew that I could never tell her that I went to the enemy's house, if you will. I could never tell her that. And she also didn't want anything to do with my brothers and sisters. That to me, they were if she knew that we saw each other, like I saw my brother Robert, who is my biological brother. Of course, the other ones are too, but they have a different mother. But if she knew that we saw ourselves as brothers and sisters, she would be upset. And so we learned early on, because of the fact that she was very negative towards my dad, and she was very negative towards even my grandparents when they were open to welcoming the other lady and the other children. And so all I heard about was negative from my biological mother. There was a lot of negativity. And I think what you're saying, Deborah, and I think also the answer to that question is, when you are centered when you focus on the child and you realize how they view things, right? How do they see things? And you live your life in the way that they would see things, knowing that they're going to love their parents. They're going to love their biological father or mother, not bad-mouthing them, but encouraging them, which is what some of these guys are saying. I think that's the key, is to focus on them, not to badmouth the biological parent or the step-parent at all, but to continue to encourage and to know that a child is going to make their decision at some point in life. I had the opportunity to see my brothers and sisters, all of us. We got together in November this last year. My brother Robert and I went down there to meet with all of them, and my dad was there, and my stepmother that was there, and we loved each other. I mean, we just love each other like brothers and sisters. But my brother had mentioned that his mother had been, she had been there like a week before we got there, and that she knew I was coming, and she wanted to see us. And I was so excited, and I told him, I said, absolutely, because she was still wondering. Now, I had not seen her. I was probably maybe 9 the last time I saw her. But to this day, I love her, and I would never tell my biological mother that, but I do. I love her like a mother because she was amazing, because she treated me right. And so again, I would suggest, watch your words, focus on the child, and remember that he or she is going to grow up, and they're going to make their own decisions, and encourage them to be productive in life. That's what I would say.
So let me just offer as a last bit of this panel that I really believe that if you know someone who is having some issues in a step family, this book offers 7 steps to a healthy family in a blended family or a step family situation. And I just personally think that people who are going into a second marriage and having all these issues as step families, I think it's really foolish if you do not educate yourself on the issues that are coming. You're really doing a disservice to your family, to your new spouse, to your old spouse, and to the other relationships that will be forged around your children. So, you know, it's difficult to talk about divorce, and I think that a lot of times in the situation where the divorce, there were a lot of real reasons of why a divorce happens, and I haven't seen a divorce yet that I would say was only one person's fault in everything, although I think there are some primary people who have caused a divorce for certain other reasons. So don't get me wrong on that, and I certainly don't want to be harsh or have a judgmental or callous attitude toward that. But all I am saying is that when you go somewhere new, you bring yourself with you, always. And that's the best place that you have control. You can't, everything else is an external control, but yourself is what you control inside from the heart issues and on out. And so, again, I think education and just understanding a lot of the new challenges that you're going to face in a step family is good. So having a book like this, I think that we all agree that Ron Deal is is one of the best authorities on how to get through some of those issues, and there's no perfect world. So educating yourself and really paying attention to how you're behaving and what you're bringing into the new relationship is a key to making a lot of other healthy relationships for your family and for your new marriage. So I'll go ahead and excuse the people off the panel. I just want to pray before we're done here, just for the step families and some of those issues that we're facing, because there are a lot of people that find themselves in a situation like that for whatever reason, and I feel like that there are times when we can come together and just pray for those issues specific, and I think that this is a good place for us to pray for Yahweh's guidance, because He's certainly the one through Yahshua that can make all of those things, even through our failures, come to be in a good way. So let's just take a moment to pray, and then Keith will come up and close us. Father, we just thank you so much for your blessing and for the opportunity to come before you today. Father, we thank you for each family that you've put in the house that you've created, Father. We know that sometimes in our imperfect world, we have to bring our brokenness and the things that we struggle with to you, and we hope and pray, and we know that you have a plan for us beyond our weaknesses. And as we've taken time to just talk about step families and to talk about blended families and children who have been through divorces and traumatic times that we have, we just pray that whoever's in the hearing of these words would be moved to improve their relationships and do the best that they can wherever they are. And we certainly have a heart to see the broken come before you and thrive again in a new family, Father. And even some of those relationships that have been torn and we've created new relationships, there's a way that they can become a peaceful and a way that helps everybody in the family to get along and to do better. And we just pray for those right now, specifically for those step families, and we pray that your will would be done, that you would open up their hearts so that it would be better. And we pray for those blessings in Yahshua's name. Hallelujah. Thank you so much.